In just 100 days, President Trump's America First economic revolution is transforming the U.S. and the world. With bold reciprocal tariffs targeting trade deficits, a push for manufacturing revival, and a fierce race for critical resources, the administration is reshaping global trade rules. From record job growth to declining prices, the U.S. economy is roaring back. Join us as we explore how Trump's policies are redefining America's economic dominance. Trump's first 100 days economic policy, America First at the core. The economic policies of President Trump's first 100 days are centered on the America First principle, aiming to reduce trade deficits, increase fiscal revenue, and promote the return of capital and manufacturing through trade protectionism, resource control, and manufacturing incentives. The ultimate goals are job growth and economic prosperity. These policies not only target short-term fiscal gains, but also seek to reshape America's dominant position in the global economy. On April 2, 2025, President Trump announced the Liberation Day tariff policy, invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, to impose a 10% universal tariff on global trading partners, with higher reciprocal tariffs on 57 countries with significant trade deficits with the U.S., effective from April 9th. Certain goods, such as steel, aluminum, auto parts, copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, key minerals, and energy products, are exempt due to existing tariffs under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. The Trump administration's short-term goals are: reduce the long-standing U.S. goods trade deficit, which reached $1.2 trillion in 2024. Increase fiscal revenue, with reciprocal tariffs expected to generate at least $1 trillion over the next decade. Pressure trading partners to negotiate lower export barriers to the U.S., improving market access. The medium and long-term goals are: encourage manufacturing to return to the U.S., revitalizing the nation's industrial base. Create more jobs and enhance economic resilience. Use tariffs as leverage to reshape global trade rules, ending non-reciprocal and unfair trade relationships with the U.S. According to the Tax Foundation, the tariff policy will generate at least $100 billion in annual revenue for the U.S., equivalent to an average tax burden reduction of about $2,300 per household. This revenue could partially offset the fiscal gap from the Trump administration's plan to extend the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, TCJA. The TCJA is a comprehensive tax reform aimed at stimulating economic growth, promoting employment, and attracting capital back to the U.S. by reducing tax rates and simplifying the tax system. Its specific goals include significantly lowering corporate and individual tax rates to increase disposable income for businesses and households, encouraging investment, consumption, and production. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed its authenticity, stating,
"And I think there's a very good chance that we will see this in the upcoming tax bill."
Bessent explained that the U.S. has already begun negotiations with 17 of its 18 largest trading partners, with many countries flying to Washington to discuss new agreements. He emphasized,
what President Trump is referring to is the ability for tariff revenue to give income tax relief.
China, as the global manufacturing hub, accounting for over 50% of global manufacturing output, and the U.S.'s biggest competitor, or more precisely, a troublemaker, is the primary target of Trump's tariff policy. China's greatest advantage lies in its dominance of global manufacturing, with over half of the world's production occurring there. However, its biggest disadvantage is that the world's largest buyer market is in the U.S., which also hosts the largest, most developed, and reliable financial market. The U.S. dollar remains the dominant global settlement currency with an irreplaceable status, and the U.S. leads in key manufacturing technologies in industries like aviation, aerospace, military, electronics, and artificial intelligence. As the world's largest buyer market, the U.S. is first dividing smaller nations, likened to small suppliers, before negotiating with China, the largest manufacturer. No small supplier would dare confront or challenge the world's biggest buyer, making it easier to secure fair trade agreements with them. This process is akin to consolidating smaller suppliers while dismantling China's previous strategy of exporting production to third countries to bypass U.S. tariffs during Trump's first term. This aims to weaken the Chinese Communist Party's monopoly in global manufacturing, rendering this Trump card ineffective. Judging by the reactions of various countries, this approach has already produced tangible results. On April 15th, Vietnam's Ministry of Trade issued an immediately effective directive requiring stricter supervision and inspection of imported goods, particularly raw materials used for production and export, to ensure the authenticity of "Made in Vietnam" labels. The new rules specifically target companies with a surge in origin certificate applications, enforcing stricter factory inspections and oversight. Notably, the directive was issued on the same day Chinese President Xi Jinping concluded his visit to Vietnam, during which both sides signed multiple cooperation agreements, including collaboration between agencies issuing certificates of origin. Vietnam imports about 40% of its goods from China, and the U.S. has openly accused China of using Vietnam as a transshipment hub to evade high tariffs on Chinese goods. Vietnam currently faces a 46% reciprocal tariff from the Trump administration, deferred until July, which, if implemented, would severely impact Vietnam's export-dependent economic growth model and threaten the supply chain factories of foreign manufacturers like Apple and Samsung, which have heavily invested in Vietnam. On April 22nd, Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh instructed officials via the government website to intensify efforts to combat trade fraud and origin falsification ahead of upcoming tariff negotiations with the U.S., addressing American concerns. Vietnam also committed to increasing imports of U.S. goods and sent Deputy Prime Minister Ho Duc Phoc to Washington to negotiate and reduce its tariff burden. Cambodia, meanwhile, faces an even higher 49% reciprocal tariff from the U.S. According to the Khmer China Times, Casey Barnett, president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Cambodia, warned that if U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Greer views Cambodia as a transshipment hub for Chinese goods into the U.S., it could lead to an intractable tariff conflict. The Cambodian government is developing new procedures and plans to prevent other countries from using it as a conduit for exports to the U.S., with a focus on strengthening oversight of Made in Cambodia labels. Cambodia's garment and footwear industries employ 750,000 workers, with exports accounting for 25% of its GDP. High tariffs threaten the survival of this critical sector, prompting the government to take emergency measures, including fiscal policies like tax credits to ease the burden on businesses. Although China is Cambodia's largest trading partner and source of investment, with bilateral trade exceeding $15 billion in 2024, Prime Minister Hun Manet is also seeking to balance relations with the U.S., Japan, and others. In fact, ASEAN countries closely aligned with China, such as those mentioned above, had already reached a consensus before Xi Jinping's visit to address U.S. tariff policies through negotiation rather than retaliation in order to maintain market access to the U.S. On April 21st, Singapore's former First Lady Ho Ching reposted an article criticizing Xi Jinping as a gangster boss bullying Southeast Asia, reflecting the complex sentiments of ASEAN countries toward China. Ho Ching also noted that Singapore faces U.S. pressure due to the transshipment of NVIDIA chips to China. A large number of U.S.-banned chips have flowed into China via Singapore, prompting the city-state to strengthen oversight of origin and transshipment trade, highlighting ASEAN's cautious stance in the U.S.-China rivalry. Additionally, the Trump administration's competition for natural resources like rare earths and copper has reached a fever pitch. The U.S. is currently on the offensive, reclaiming Greenland, facilitating Russia-Ukraine peace talks to collaborate on rare earths with both nations, and aggressively acquiring copper resources. The Financial Times reported on April 29th that Swiss commodity trader Mercuria warned that U.S. buyers are frantically stockpiling copper ahead of Trump's tariffs, causing China's hoarded inventories to dry up rapidly. It's estimated that China's stockpiles could be depleted in a few months, with the market facing the most severe supply shock in history. The massive demand from U.S. buyers has drawn copper supplies from other countries, creating a direct competition between the U.S. and China for copper resources. Nicholas Snowden, head of metals and mining research at Mercuria, stated that China's copper inventories have decreased rapidly over the past few weeks, and at this rate, local stockpiles could hit zero by mid-June. According to the Shanghai Futures Exchange, China's copper inventories dropped by nearly 55,000 metric tons last week, totaling 116,800 metric tons. In contrast, copper inventories in U.S. warehouses on the New York Mercantile Exchange, COMEX, surged in April, reaching a new high on April 25th, the highest since 2018. Costas Bintas, head of metals and mining at Mercuria, noted that this marks the first time the U.S. has directly competed with China for copper, likely leading to a sharp rise in prices. Furthermore, the Trump administration plans to incentivize domestic manufacturing investment through tax breaks, subsidies, and regulatory reforms, with key measures including tax incentives, allowing businesses to immediately deduct the cost of building new factories, including construction and equipment, rather than depreciating over years. This policy is retroactive to January 20, 2025, covering equipment and facilities, low tax rates, proposing a 15% corporate tax rate for domestic manufacturers to enhance competitiveness. Deregulation, leveraging reforms to the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, to expedite factory approvals, with plans to introduce AI technology to optimize environmental assessments. As of April 2025, these policies have attracted over $5 trillion in intended investments across industries like automotive, electronics, and steel. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt recently stated that in just over 3 months, President Trump has revitalized the economy. Jobs are surging, prices are starting to fall, and Americans are feeling optimistic for the first time in years.
345,000 jobs have already been added.
Last month alone exceeded expectations by 100,000 jobs. Manufacturing, a sector many thought was beyond recovery, is experiencing a resurgence, adding 9,000 jobs. She reminded the audience that during the Biden administration, the U.S. lost an average of 6,000 manufacturing jobs per month. The cost of living is finally easing. Gasoline prices have dropped by 7%, energy prices are falling across the board, and prescription drug prices have seen the largest decline in history. Egg prices, which soared under Biden, have plummeted 50% since Trump took office.
This has truly been the most historic start to a presidency in American history.
While pursuing these revenue-generating measures, the Trump administration is also working to cut costs through the DOGE team led by Elon Musk, aiming to save federal spending, curb corruption among Washington bureaucrats, and reduce unnecessary waste. So far, DOGE claims to have saved $160 billion, including costs reduced through lease cancellations, contract terminations, and federal workforce reductions. This has also directly led to a reduction in U.S. Treasury borrowing. In the first quarter, U.S. debt financing needs were $20 billion lower than the Treasury's February forecast, and in the second quarter, the Treasury expects to borrow $530 billion less than projected 3 months ago. This unexpected downward revision in the debt issuance plan may be one reason Treasury yields continued to decline, hitting a daily low of 4.21% today. Renowned American historian and conservative commentator Victor Davis Hanson, a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, commented on Trump's first 100 days, calling it a revolutionary transformation.
No one in their right mind thought anybody would try to stage a counter-revolution and be so successful in the first 100 days.
Since Reagan or Roosevelt, no president has driven so much change in such a short time. Hanson noted that this is precisely why the establishment is in a panic. This isn't just a policy shift, it's the end of one era and the beginning of a new one. Do you agree with Hanson's perspective? We welcome your comments and unique insights. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.